Splatoon and Splatoon 2 are third-person shooter games in which players control human-squid hybrids, called Inklings, and wield a wide variety of creative weapon types in online multiplayer matches. In Turf War, Splatoon's main game mode, two teams of 4 players battle for control of a map over the course of 3 minutes. Each team is assigned a bright color of ink and must use their weapons to spread as much of their team's ink across the map as possible. The interesting thing about Splatoon is that while its mechanics are based mostly around shooting and using weapons, it really never feels like a violent game.
This is due in part to the game's cartoonish and playful art style, but is mostly because of how the Turf War game mode directs players' attention away from killing other players and makes them focus on the objective as much as possible. In fact, eliminating players in this game is called splatting as opposed to killing. In Turf War, the only way to increase your score and gain experience points is to put ink on the map. Splatting other players becomes secondary. It is primarily a tactic Splatoon players must use to give themselves and their teammates a better opportunity to cover ground.
It should be made clear that Splatoon does not discourage players from killing other players, it simply doesn't reward them for doing so. In the average game of Turf War, you're extremely likely to encounter an enemy player and have the opportunity to splat them. In this way, Splatoon does retain some conventional elements of shooter games, but encounters with enemy players are never at the center of the game. Players who run around the map actively seeking enemies will almost always finish with a lower score than their teammates who focus primarily on covering ground and only deal with enemies when they get in the way.
While many of the most popular shooter games do feature objective modes where killing is not the primary goal, most of them still reward the player with experience points for tallying up kills. Because it does not do this, Splatoon shows that it is possible to make a high-quality shooter game that is not about killing.
Even so, Splatoon and Splatoon 2 are undeniably shooters at heart. They feature a variety of weapon types to suit different styles of play, and the game requires players to use these weapons in order to complete the objective. It is as fast-paced as any great shooter game. In fact, the objective of Turf War incentivizes players to use their weapons as much as they possibly can, even more so than other, more violent shooters. Time spent standing still or not shooting is time wasted in Splatoon.
That being said, guns in Splatoon are more than just weapons, they're tools. Other traditional games feature guns with immense killing potential. This weaponry is primarily used to dominate other players to win the match, but mainly used for bolstering personal stat. Here is one of the largest differences between Splatoon and other shooters. The weaponry in Splatoon is created primarily to be a tool for victory, not a tool for mass destruction or maximum carnage. This is especially the case in Turf Wars. While downing enemy players allows for easier completion of the match, killing enemy team members never raises personal stat. Points at the end of the match are awarded for how much ground the player covers, not how many kills. These points are also displayed in a large font text, whereas other stats, such as player kills, are displayed in very small plain text. In other words, these are secondary and minor stats. That being said, using your weapon to paint the ground becomes the primary function of the gun. In this way, Splatoon emphasizes completion of the objective rather than elimination of other players.
Because Splatoon takes the shooter genre's emphasis off of killing other players, it is suitable for players of a wider range of ages than the M-rated games that currently saturate the genre. It is also important that the developers avoid using language associated with violence, words like kill or die, in favor of something more playful and less permanent, like splat. Splatoon effectively repurposes the mechanics of conventional shooting games to make a game that gives players the visceral thrill and fast pace of online multiplayer shooters without the gratuitous and purposeless violence that has become typical of the genre. Yes, you can still kill in Splatoon, but it serves no function aside from clearing a path for your teammates to pursue the non-violent objectives.
That's what makes Splatoon so great. It manages to provide a refreshing and less violent twist on a genre that has grown stale over the past decade, while still standing as an incredibly fun shooter that can be enjoyed by players of all ages. Contemporary gamers will be familiar with the primary mechanics of the game, and will not feel too alienated by Splatoon's less familiar, unconventional elements.